Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 46 of the Say Again podcast with me, Amrita Tripathi. I'm so excited today to be bringing you some clips from the best of season 2 of this podcast, where I'm talking to CEOs, COOs, founders, mental health experts, policy experts, and even a musician on how Gen AI is impacting all of us. There might be some facets you didn't think of. We'll wind down this episode with some thoughts on success and failure and impact, as well as gratitude, as always. We'll kick off with a snippet of my chat with Dr. Pathare on NetShrink on X, on what he calls tech snake oil salespeople, why we shouldn't be trusting our mental health to LLMs. Now, we recorded this a while ago, and you might have heard echoes of this globally because this is becoming a huge concern. Following an excerpt of that chat, which of course you can find the full conversation wherever you get your podcasts, we'll follow that up with the ever thoughtful and wise Colin Crowell, a public policy veteran, also on how we should be looking at Gen AI and LLMs more as tools rather than anything else. Use them well, don't let them use you. And as he says, the trouble starts when we start anthropomorphizing them. We are hearing, okay, there's not enough access to resources, mental health treatment or evidence-based treatment is expensive. And now you have this sort of AI revolution, like therapy bots are going to fill in this gap. And apparently people are already talking to ChatGPT like it's a therapist. So where do you weigh in on that? Because you were talking, a few minutes ago about the importance of self-care, even your friends and family knowing, this, we've spoken about this in the past as well. If everybody could sort of up their level of, let's say mental health first aid or understand or learn how to active listen, etc., you wouldn't have such a burden on the mental health professionals because it's not like the comparison you made of tertiary care hospitals required. But right now, when you see this craze of, as you're calling them, a tech snake oil salesman or therapy bots,
snake oil salesman, snake oil, all of it is snake oil. And the reason I say it's snake oil is very simple. Anyone who's selling a therapy bot, okay, or AI. See, there are two kinds of therapy things, okay. One is these platforms which will connect you to an actual therapist and you can talk to them. Now they're not actually using technology. They're just a glorified Zoom, basically, okay. They are allowing you to connect to a therapist who's doing therapy remotely for you instead of doing it physically. So let's leave that out. I'm talking about bits where people are saying, oh, you know what, there is an automated way in which the therapy bot is going to, some AI driven stuff is going to do the therapy for you. So there's no human being involved. Now, with that kind of stuff, to me, that is complete snake oil. Okay. Totally snake oil. And the reason I say totally snake oil is very simple. None of them, or almost, you can say almost all of them, do not have any evidence that they are effective, do not have any evidence that they are safe, okay, and do not actually satisfy any of the privacy and data privacy concerns and all of that stuff, so they are totally snake oil. When you ask these therapy people and who are doing these apps and all, and there's this idea that, oh, but how can you cause any harm by talking to someone? You can cause huge amount of harm if you're not talking properly to someone. And my simple thing is, like, imagine if I designed a stent, okay? Let's take the heart as an example. If I designed a stent and started selling the stent, and I have no evidence that the stent actually works or the stent is safe, would you allow the people to sell stents like that? I mean, stents are regulated. You can't, the FDA in USA not only regulates medicines, but also regulates medical devices. And a stent is called a medical device. So why are these therapy bots not called medical devices? And why are they not regulated? And if they were being regulated, then they would have to have evidence data. They would have to show that, look, this is effective. We've got some trials showing it is effective. We know it is safe because we've done the trial. At the moment, none of that is happening. At the moment, some couple of tech bro kids will get together and write some software and say, here is a bot, and put it out in the market and start collecting cash. I mean,
and data. Oh God, what are they doing with everyone's data? That's also the scary.
What are the privacy concerns? Like, what happens to people's data? Where is all this stored? How do we know it's not going to get leaked? So, to me, this is complete snake oil, to be honest.
what we're seeing with GenAI, like, so from the mental health, perspective, I can tell you, I've been talking to some experts who've been like, please stop using Chat GPT, for example, as your therapist. It's not your therapist. It's not trained to, so there's a lot of safeguards that have to be built in still to sort of the way these LLMs work. People have obviously adapted and adopted these technologies, and just we're all using them. But do you have any concerns about, sort of privacy or what you'd want people to sort of keep an eye on? I think in the past we used to tell people try and read the terms and conditions. I don't think that's still happening. But is there anything you'd advise folks as we adopt these new technologies as consumers?
Yeah, I think the key thing from a consumer perspective to factor in and to try to keep in mind is that these are tools. And I think when they acquire an anthropomorphic quality to it, it can do a disservice to people because, as you point out, Amrita, they're not your therapist. They're a tool. They can illuminate information and content. They can synthesize and summarize content very well and rapidly. They still hallucinate a greater degree than most people would want to see for something that increasingly consumers will want to and may start to rely upon. And so the veracity coefficient needs to be much higher. And I think the AI companies are aware of that and trying to continue to innovate and refine their models so that they hallucinate less in the future. But consider them a tool, like any other tool. The human has to remain in the driver's seat. We can't become subservient to the tools or rely upon them too much, certainly at this point.
Next is musician and composer Vidya Shah with a whole new aspect of this conversation. Those hours of drudgery, as she puts it, rote work, training, all that it takes to be good at anything, or especially to master something. Well, what happens when all that goes out the window, or we delegate all of that to an LLM because we just don't want to do it anymore? What happens to the process? What happens to our expertise? Do we not lose out in this? Listen in, and we'll be back with a couple more clips after that as well. There was something you just said, which reminded me, this is so relevant to today as well, the part of the drudgery you called it. So the discipline of learning and going and rote and, to learn any instrument as well, it's such a critical part of that training, right? So
Absolutely.
do you feel like that those kind of foundation blocks are going to be one of the first things to, go? Because I feel like that might be one of the risks, right? Because if you're able to automate a lot of this, then how do you tell people that somehow the process is the reward also, right? In a way.
Absolutely. You're so right, Amrita. I can't tell you that, it worries me so much that the inability to engage with any knowledge system, whatever it might be, is what is happening right now, right? And I think the sheer that the voids that will create is going to take away from being able to enjoy your life. The joy of reading a book, or the joy of listening to a bandish which plays for 40 minutes. I mean, just the sheer inability of your mind to be able to engage with the slowness of it, is really affecting us in ways that unfortunately are not in our phase. You see, you don't understand how your brain is getting affected by the fact that it is becoming more and more and more limited in how it can process. That's such an important word that you used. So that worries me a lot because there's only so much of shallowness that one can survive with, right? And I'm not just talking about doing some heavy duty classical training or anything, but to be even to be able to enjoy it, I think that is taking away from the beauty of the intangible world, which has so much to offer and which is which is becoming more and more undervalued.
Lots to think about here, right? So please bookmark, make your notes, and don't forget to share with us your thoughts on this subject. We'll be talking a little bit now about success, failure, startups, and how we look at impact. Up next, Abhishek Kumar laughs at all the gyan we hear on X and LinkedIn and all the advice doing the rounds, but I did prevail upon him to share some insights for startup founders. It's not just about shiny decks to impress VCs that startup founders should be focusing on. He shares a little bit of that insight. We'll follow that up with a wonderful Kirsten Freeman talking to us about what's changed in her own definition of success and failure over a decades-long journey in leadership. She also shares some of her own health journey and what she's grateful for every day. And finally, Piyush Tewari, whose work on road safety has already made such an impact on people's lives, talks about success and failure and thinking about not just unicorns, but social impact unicorns that could potentially have an impact on billions of lives. What are some common mistakes you've seen with startups? And we'll get some advice from you also on what you think startup founders should focus on, because it's not just about the idea, like you've told me. It's not just about having that cool idea.
I think now these days, if you open Twitter or maybe even LinkedIn, you have so much gyan on startups that I think I don't even need to say anything because everyone can just read. Everyone's giving gyan on startups. But the mistakes, or I would say, I think the difference between, you mentioned the failures and the successes. The one thing I saw, and I worked with very successful startup founders who built multi-billion-dollar businesses and very well-known names. And I think at least in the initial phase, the successful ones stood out because they were the ones building for their users, buyers, consumers, whatever you call them, versus many others who were building to raise funding. So there were a lot who would just focus on building a startup or a business which would look attractive for a VC to invest in. Whereas the really successful ones were the ones who built first to attract users. I know most people will say, but that, they're both the same, right? If you have users, you'll get VCs, but it doesn't work like that. I think I've seen a lot of people first focus on making sure that they have the right deck that will attract a VC, etc., rather than it's tougher. But I would say build out first, get real users or buyers or consumers, have them validate the business, and then you don't need to validate to an investor, right? Validation for a business should not come from an investor only. It has to first come from the user. Yes, maybe at an idea stage, if you're getting kind of angel investors, seed investors, yeah, fine. You discuss with them, they believe in your idea, they will give you that capital to start out. But then after that, you have to have enough critical mass of users, which depends on the sector. Obviously, in some sectors, a few hundred users might be good enough to, proceed. In some, you need thousands, right? And I think if you parse out all the successful startups in the last 10 years, you look at them, they would have raised capital, their first institutional round of capital, much longer or further down in their journey than the unsuccessful ones. We all know the very large startups which raised a large amount of money and then crashed and burned, right? Because when it was time to get the consumers buy-in or the users buy-in, that's where they stumbled. They all had shiny decks, PPTs, but I don't think that works. I think so. Yeah, I think focus on the user, consumer. I think that's all. And that's not even an advice that everyone knows that. Maybe also just stay away from all the startup media for a while because there's so much noise. You have to zone in on your business, your users, your competitors, and that's it. And for a while, just stay on that.
Have you changed your definitions of like success or failure? Like, do you feel like, we talked about balance earlier. So coming back to that, kind of looking at how you achieve that balance in life now, has it impacted how you look at maybe success or failure?
Yeah, I think it has. I have worked too hard in the past and been too driven by work at the expense of probably my own personal health, if I'm being honest. It's just something in me to work hard, and I love what I do. But I know now that I'm better when I'm balanced. I feel better within myself, and I'm in better health when I have a balance. I'm not a competitive person, and I wouldn't even really say I was an ambitious person, actually. I haven't strived for particular leadership roles. I think what I've strived to be is to be fulfilled and to feel that I'm offering something back and that I'm doing meaningful work. That's been what's most important for me.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So is there anything you'd like to share that you're grateful for? We like to sort of wind down on gratitude.
Yeah, that's so nice. Yes. So I sort of alluded to it before with health issues, but I had a breast cancer issue 5 years ago, and I have to say, and this sounds so Pollyanna, but it is actually genuine. Ever since that, I find gratitude embedded into every single day. I seriously feel when I wake up and there's another day ahead of me, I only can feel grateful about that. So that's my journey. It's not, I'm not suggesting that that's everyone's or it should be, but it actually, that health scare, and I'm fine, by the way, but that health scare really actually was a fundamental shift for me. It really forced me to think quite differently about the way that I balance, actually, essentially. Clearly, I'm hugely grateful that we live in a country like Australia right now, and that we have the things that are afforded to us living here, seeing what's going on in the world. But yeah, I essentially feel really grateful, pretty grateful, really grateful.
I do want to ask, so how do you look at, and for example, when you're looking at your brother's journey as well, he's had an incredible journey and he does, tap you for advice as well. How do you look at success and failure for both of you? And then just more broadly, you spoke a little bit about this risk, sort of the risk appetite, but how do you look at success and failure and how it might change people?
I think the way we define success and failure for us is, I think, it's something interesting that I read, that there is this whole idea of, unicorns reaching $1 billion valuation, right? And then there are these social impact unicorns that, talk about impacting or influencing 1 billion people. And I think the way we've been brought up and the way we look at ourselves as being successful is about how many lives are we able to touch, through our work or through our efforts. And this is not to say that, you can't do that in a corporate setting or you can't do that in a media setting. I think all of these are legitimate ways of touching lives, of reaching people. I think just for us, because of our circumstances, we found purpose in certain things that turned out to be, things that were, more social impact in nature. But I think fundamentally the goal is to be able to positively influence as many lives as we possibly can in our lifetime. And I think that's really what the legacy should be about, not so much about resources, because resources come and go, as we've seen in the family, and as I see every day running a nonprofit, right? Yeah. The resources is something that come and go, but I think really what gives you power is how many people support you, how many people are behind you, and I think that's really a big point of success for me, at least. I think it is for him as well, but definitely I think how many lives you touch is an important,
I hope you enjoyed this episode and found some of those conversations inspiring. You'll find, of course, the entire conversations on our podcast playlist on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Look out for Say Again with Amrita Tripathi. And don't forget to leave us a rating, review, or comment. We'll see you again next week.